As people survey the damage done by the intense flash flooding yesterday, the Insurance Bureau of Canada says residents need to figure out what their policies cover.
So the Bureau says some kinds of damage will only be covered if you've purchased optional coverage on top of your typical home or vehicle policy. So let's talk more about this morning. Anne-Marie Thomas is the Director of Consumer and Industry Relations at the Insurance Bureau of Canada. Anne-Marie, I'm sure people have a million questions for you, so we're glad you're here this morning. Let's talk about what is typically covered in floods like what we saw in Toronto yesterday and what likely won't be covered by many policies.
Right. So a typical homeowner's insurance policy doesn't cover damage caused by sewer backup or flood. It only covers, water caused by a burst pipe or something like that in your home. In order to have sewer backup or overland flood coverage, you had to have purchased that from your insurance company. And it's almost like a mini policy within your insurance policy, specifically relating to water.
Okay, so if it's heavy rain and your basement gets flooded and you don't have that special option, you didn't purchase that option, you're pretty much out of pocket yourself, correct?
That's correct.
And what about for cars, Anne-Marie? I know certain vehicles also have, insurance policies. What does that cover?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So in order for your car to be covered, like those ones stranded on the Don Valley Parkway, you would have to have purchased additional either comprehensive or collision or all perils coverage on your car in order to have the car removed and repaired or replaced.
And Anne-Marie, I'm curious because some people made a distinct decision to drive into, what we are advised not to drive into, and that is water where you don't know how deep it is. How much more does that complicate things, even if you have bought the over-the-top additional policy? If you drive into a situation like that, is your coverage going to maintain, or would that invalidate it?
Yeah, your coverage would be maintained. It's not like people knew their cars were going to get flooded. It was just a risk they took. So no, it wouldn't invalidate your coverage.
And Anne-Marie, do you predict or anticipate that the city of Toronto would bear any of these costs, much like they do for, let's say, potholes if you run over them? I mean, are there any kind of fights to be had here in terms of people who got their vehicles damaged or in trouble yesterday?
Typically, no, but that's not to say that people won't try and recoup from the city if they have no other alternative.
Anne-Marie, it's curious because, right now we're living at a time of, rising prices. A lot of, people are concerned about, whether it's their next paycheck or just, the cost of living, et cetera. When we talk about these additional kind of policies, let's say for a house to make sure you're protected from overland water flooding rather than just or sewer backup even, how much more per month on a typical home would you likely be looking at on a policy?
So if we said that the average cost for this in overland flood or sewer backup, a total ballpark, because each home is so unique, but let's say it's $200 a year, right? Okay. So maybe that's less than $20 a month to have this coverage added to your policy.
Okay. And Anne-Marie, for the people who did buy into this option of, insurance for their homes that get flooded, what is the first thing they need to do? I imagine if they're getting it fixed by, a different company or whatever, they need to save receipts and take a lot of photos. Is that the first step?
Absolutely. Of course, don't go anywhere that it's not safe. If there's power and water together, not a good combination. So, you may have to wait for Toronto Hydro or someone to switch off the electricity. But contact your insurance company to report any damage. As you say, take pictures, make a list. We have cell phones now. Maybe walk around your place with your cell phone. You mentioned keeping receipts is always a good idea, and keeping receipts related to cleanup. So, for example, if you saw the water coming in yesterday and you went to, one of these equipment rental places and you got a vacuum that sucks out water, keep the receipt for that. The insurance company will reimburse you for the costs that you incurred to mitigate further damage.
Good point. And Anne-Marie, I'm really curious. You know, we used to talk about these storms in terms of the once in 100 years or once every 50 years, but we're seeing them much more and more frequently. What is the typical advice from the Insurance Bureau of Canada when it comes to how people are sort of choosing to insure themselves? And is that advice changing based on climate change, quite frankly?
Yeah, so if we go back to the summer of I think it was 2013, there was no flood coverage available in Canada. And if you remember, we had those terrible floods in Toronto and again in Calgary, which caused the insurance industry to take a look at what consumers need and what the companies are offering. And that's where overland flood coverage was created. And so the advice is still the same. Do all the things that you do to protect your home. We chatted off air a little bit about making sure your home is graded away from your house, because what you don't want to happen is when water pools in your yard, it finds its way because of the slope into your home. So do all those kinds of things. Maybe install a sump pump or backwater valve in your basement so that it can detect when water is starting and it can shut it down.
Yeah, and that's what we had to do when our basement got flooded 2 years ago with that heavy rain up in Collingwood and Blue Mountains. A sump pump might be expensive now, but it'll save you some headache later on. So
that's right.
Anne-Marie Thomas, thanks so much. We appreciate your time from the Insurance Bureau of Canada. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.